All right, everyone, we officially have a diagnosis. Let's get into it. All right, so let's start out with TMZ's latest report.
The information we now have, Nick Reiner is not going to plead guilty to these murders. He is going to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, and here's why. We have learned that Nick Reiner was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was under the care of a psychiatrist and receiving meds. His behavior in the month before the murders, and this is a quote from sources with direct knowledge, was erratic and dangerous. He went to an LA rehab facility in the time before the murders. He had been to a number, but in particular, this one that specializes in treating mental illness. It's really expensive. It costs $70,000 a month. Lots of rich, powerful parents send their kids to this facility who have mental illness, and Nick was there. In the 3 to 4 weeks, and this is so important, in the 3 to 4 weeks leading up to the murders, Nick's medications were changed. And they were changed because he was exhibiting more and more erratic and dangerous behavior. But when they were changed, they weren't right. And it was making him, as one source put it, crazy. And the doctors were trying to adjust the.
All right, so TMZ was reporting that Nick was recently, for the first time ever, diagnosed with schizophrenia at the age of 32. I will say that to me it sticks out as odd, given that he has at least a decade plus history of meeting with different doctors and psychiatrists, and been through different types of programs and clinics and rehabs. So that to me, something like that type of serious diagnosis doesn't just slip through the cracks. And I mean, someone can make the argument of, oh well, some people do get diagnosed later. Yeah, that's not if they have a CVS receipt long of rehab stints or working with different doctors or therapists. And he was also prescribed new antipsychotic medications, which he seemingly was having some serious negative side effects. TMZ is reporting that sources, people close to him, were saying, quote, was making him crazy. What does that mean? Was he destructive? Was he physically violent in any way? Was he engaging in self-harm? Was he making suicidal ideation statements? Some crazy could also be having a manic episode, manic symptoms, which can happen with an overload of serotonin. It's called serotonin syndrome, and basically it can be life-threatening if it's not addressed, and it basically throws your whole body into a state of panic, and racing, ruminating thoughts, and you're in a constant state of mania, and whatever you do, you can't come down, and that's something that needs to be immediately addressed inpatient. So if his family members or whoever, people around him, were noticing that he's becoming erratic, then at that point you think that he would be forced to be inpatient, because the thing is, with safety concerns, yes, he's an adult, and you can argue it's voluntary if he even wants to be in these clinics. However, if you're a threat to yourself or someone else, you can be put into a 5150 hold for 72 hours to undergo assessment and examination. Let's continue on.
Meds, but it wasn't working. And he was getting more and more erratic. In addition to that, Nick was abusing substances, and we're told the substance abuse worsened the schizophrenia. So all of this paints a picture of someone. In fact, these words were used to us by one of these sources with direct knowledge, that he was quote, out of his head at the time of the murders. So, based on everything I know, this is not going to be a case where they contest that Nick did it. I think they're going to concede it. I don't know that for a fact, but all of the dots that we now have to connect lead us to this is not going to be a not guilty plea, I didn't do it. This is going to be, at least at this point, based on everything we know, without saying more about sources, if I were a betting man, I would say this is a not guilty by reason of insanity.
All right, so the next rational question is, why was he able to live outside of a facility? Why was he able to receive outpatient treatment? Well, with schizophrenia, there is a spectrum. So there are more higher functioning people with schizophrenia. For example, you can live alone if you're schizophrenic. You need to make sure you are able to maintain and stick to your routines, be medication compliant, have a good support system. Sometimes it can be helpful to have a roommate or a close friend or family member living nearby. In Nick's case, he did live on his parents' property in a back house. So I'm sure his parents were able to help him try to maintain any of his medical and psychiatric appointments that he had. Another thing I want to add here as well is it's interesting because typically when you meet with a client and you have with a psychiatrist, it's typically once a month. If it's more high acuity clients, meaning they're more high risk, they need additional care, additional services, you can check in with them 2 or 3 times a week even. Also, when a client attends these weekly meetings, they complete what's called a set of outcome measures that assesses for anxiety and depression, in addition to safety measures. One particular most commonly used one is called the CSSRS, the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, which assesses for clients' suicidal ideation, intensity, severity, plan. And so to me, if he was cleared to be released to be home, then he would have scaled either fairly baseline or fairly low on those outcome measures. Because if he did pop as high risk at that time, then I mean, number one, there's a safety plan put into place, and as well there's a more serious assessment for need to be inpatient hospitalized. Now, sure, you can make the argument that people can lie on these outcome measures, but it is still up to the clinician to assess their mood, assess for their emotional stability, assessing whether they're medication compliant. And you could tell by when you're face to face with the client whether they're seemingly more agitated, or you're noticing a shift in their motor movement, a shift in their voice tone, their speech cadence, whether they're seeming more agitated. So to me, it would be either he completed his measures and he scored very low, so there was no threat to safety, or for some reason those measures weren't completed, or if they were completed and he did pop a little bit higher in terms of risk, maybe when they did a safety plan, because with safety that is a limit of confidentiality, so you would bring in family members to help support the client. So in that case, it could be possible that his parents were the ones offering that support for him, which of course, as we see now, was to their detriment. Let's continue on with the latest from entertainment journalist Rob Shooter. He's reporting that the Reiner family is actually standing by Nick. Sources close to the situation say Nick had been diagnosed with schizophrenia weeks before the stabbings and was under active psychiatric care. I'm told his condition worsened after doctors adjusted his medication roughly a month before the killings, triggering behavior described as deeply concerning. After the medication change, he wasn't himself at all. He became unpredictable, confused, and frighteningly unstable. Despite the horror of what happened, those closest to the Reiners insist the family does not want the death penalty pursued and is unified in stance. Despite the horror of what happened, those closest to the Reiners insist the family does not want the death penalty pursued and is unified in that stance. They see this as a catastrophic failure of mental health treatment. Nick is seriously ill. They believe killing him won't bring Rob and Michelle back, and it won't fix what went wrong. I'm told Nick is expected to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. They've lost 3 people. Rob and Michelle are gone, and the Nick they knew is gone too. They don't see him as a monster. They see him as someone who was failed. Justice to them means treatment, accountability, and making sure this never happens again. Another death isn't justice. All right, so the family is, in essence, blaming his mental health care team. So now let's take a look at some possible facilities, because that hasn't been released yet. We don't know exactly the name of the clinic that he was staying at or receiving services from. So my good assistant Claude was able to help me out here. So let's take a look at a list of LA-based clinics that offer high-end services or services to high-end clients. So the first one is Passages Malibu. Of course, there's famous celebrities that have gone there. That one's a pretty well-known facility. Mel Gibson, David Hasselhoff, Natasha Lyonne. This one is a non-12-step program, and of course it's Malibu, so it's going to be oceanfront. Cliffside is another one. Lindsay Lohan, Ty Lawson went there. Promises is another huge one. Britney Spears was famous for being in and out of there. Ben Affleck, Robert Downey Jr., Charlie Sheen, Diana Ross. There's also Seasons. And this is an interesting point here that was pulled out of the Seasons website. All therapists have master's degree or higher. Yeah, that's kind of a basic. Like all therapists should at least have their master's, and they should be licensed. Next we have, okay, it's not going to be Reflections, and then there's Summit Malibu. Well, I mean, we can imagine that whichever clinic it is, you know, whoever his mental health care team is, most likely they're going to be subpoenaed. So we're going to eventually hear from them. As of now, all we can do is follow the case as things continue to come to light, and wait for his arraignment on January 7th. All right, guys, that's all I have for you today. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.